Imagine just for a second what our civilization looks like from a purely physical perspective.
Right.
Like, we have this image of ourselves as being essentially immortal. We build these massive server farms,
Yeah.
right? Just sprawling warehouses of blinking lights.
Yeah, buried deep in freezing Arctic mountains.
Exactly. And they're consuming the power of entire cities just to stay cool.
Mhm.
And inside those servers, we're holding on to every thought, every photograph, every historical record, basically every single piece of data we've ever produced.
Which is a lot of data.
It's an insane amount of data, and we operate under this collective assumption that, well, because we write everything down on silicon and we back it up to the cloud, our footprint is permanent. But when you actually step back and look at the deep past, that illusion of permanence just kind of shatters.
It shatters completely. And, I mean, the reason it shatters is because we suffer from this profound recency bias.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we tend to equate technological complexity with durability.
Oh, like a smartphone is better than a rock.
Right, exactly. We assume that because a smartphone is 1,000,000 times more complex than a stone tablet, it must somehow be more permanent. But those blinking lights in the Arctic, they are incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
They're completely dependent on an uninterrupted stream of energy, these pristine environments, and constant maintenance.
Which is the perfect jumping off point for what we are doing today. Welcome to the Morning Roundup.
Yes.
This is where we take a massive stack of the day's most fascinating sources, articles, research papers, cultural commentary, and we do a deep dive. We thread them all together to find the hidden themes that are actively shaping our world.
And today's stack is wild.
It really is. Today, our sources range from ancient Aboriginal geomythology to the breakdown of the digital monoculture, all the way to Elon Musk's political evolution and the philosophy of artificial intelligence.
Which on the surface sounds like a completely random assortment of topics.
Totally. Like, what do ancient volcanoes have to do with algorithms or theology or Elon Musk?
It sounds chaotic until you look at the underlying currents. I mean, every single one of these sources across vastly different disciplines is fundamentally trying to answer the exact same question.
Which is?
What is real and what is actually worth preserving? The through line today is the search for anchors in a fragmenting world. We're looking at how human beings hold on to meaning, memory, and our core values when the systems we built, like algorithms, AI, and these shifting cultural norms, are actively dismantling them.
I want to start by unpacking this illusion of permanence because the numbers here are just staggering. According to one of our sources today by Michael Button, humanity currently produces 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every single day.
It's a number so large it basically loses all meaning.
Right. It feels like we are the most recorded, most documented generation in the history of the universe. We map the entire planet with satellites down to the centimeter, but the researchers in the source bring up this terrifying paradox.
Yeah, the digital dark age.
Exactly. Despite all this data, we are actually living in a digital dark age.
It's an incredibly apt term. There's this fascinating paper published a few years ago called the Silurian Hypothesis, authored by Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt.
Okay, what's that about?
Well, they posed a thought experiment. What would happen to the physical footprint of an industrial civilization like ours over the course of, say, 4 or 5 million years?
Okay.
And the terrifying answer is basically nothing. It leaves almost no trace.
Wait, seriously?
Seriously. Our modern memory is built on silicon, magnetic orientation, and light.
Wait, walk me through that. We think of silicon microchips as these hard physical things. How do they just disappear?
Because silicon degrades. And, more importantly, the magnetic drives we use to store the vast majority of the world's data suffer from a phenomenon known as bit rot.
Bit rot.
Yeah. Data on a hard drive is just microscopic regions of a magnetic material polarized to represent a 0 or a 1. Over time, due to ambient thermodynamics, background radiation, simple material decay, that magnetic orientation eventually loses its charge and flips.
So the data just vanishes.
Your data effectively evaporates into random noise. Furthermore, the cloud isn't a magical, ethereal space.
Right, it's just someone else's computer.
Exactly. It's someone else's physical computer. When the power grid stops, or when the hardware physically degrades over a few decades, the history vanishes. Scientific studies suggest that our hyper-advanced digital civilization might actually be the most transient, ephemeral civilization to ever exist on this planet.
So it's like we're writing the most detailed encyclopedia in human history, but we're writing it in disappearing ink on a napkin that's sitting in a rainstorm.
That's a great way to put it.
So if the cloud is that fragile, what is the alternative? This is where the source dives into this emerging field called geomythology, which I found absolutely
It
mind-bending.
really is.
For the longest time, Western historians operated on this assumption called the serial reproduction fallacy.
Right, which is basically an academic term for the telephone game.
Yeah, exactly. You know how it works. I whisper a phrase to you, you whisper it to the next person, and by the time it reaches the 10th person, the message is completely distorted.
Historians assumed that human memory is inherently fragile and flawed.
Which feels like a logical assumption to make. If I try to remember a conversation I had 3 weeks ago, I'm probably going to embellish half of it.
Right, so the operating assumption was that if an ancient culture tells a story and passes it down orally through generations, within roughly 500 to 800 years, the original facts will have completely decayed into pure fantasy, magic, and myth.
We look at ancient myths and assume these people just didn't understand the physical world, so they made up fairy tales about angry gods to explain the weather.
But geomythologists are realizing these aren't just myths.
No, they are high-fidelity, incredibly accurate observations of catastrophic geological events. The source shares the story from the Klamath people in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, the Mount Mazama story.
Yes. For thousands of years, they've told this oral history about a massive battle between two gods. You have Lao, the chief of the below world, and Skel, the chief of the above world.
And the physical details encoded into this story are what make it a scientific marvel. According to the Klamath legend, Lao stood on top of Mount Mazama, enraged, and began punishing the people below by raining down fire and red-hot rocks.
Wow.
The legend says the sky turned completely black with ash, blocking out the sun. And in the climax of this battle, the mountain itself melted and collapsed inward, driving the god of the underworld back into the earth.
And the massive hole left behind eventually filled with water, creating what we now know as Crater Lake in Oregon.
Exactly. For centuries, anthropologists documented that and thought, oh, what a lovely poetic origin myth for a beautiful lake.
But then modern geologists actually went in and mapped the area.
And they discovered that Mount Mazama didn't just have a standard volcanic eruption. It underwent a catastrophic caldera collapse.
Which is when the volcano erupts so hard it empties its own magma chamber, right?
Yeah. Right. Roughly 7,700 years ago, it erupted with such immense force that with nothing supporting the weight of the mountain, the entire peak structurally failed and literally fell in on itself.
And the sequence of events described in the Klamath myth aligns perfectly, stage by stage, with the geological record. The fireballs were pyroclastic flows.
The black sky was an ash plume that scientists now know reached 50 kilometers into the stratosphere.
The scale of that memory is what demands our attention. 7,700 years.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that.
To put that in perspective, that is nearly double the accepted age of the Great Pyramids of Giza. It predates the rise of the Sumerian civilization in Mesopotamia.
Human beings stood there, watched a mountain disappear into the earth, encoded that sheer trauma into a narrative structure, and transmitted it through roughly 250 human generations.
And they did it with such stunning mechanical accuracy that modern geologists can literally use a spoken poem to track specific volcanic stages.
Yeah, and if you think 7,700 years is impressive, the source takes us to Australia, to the Gunditjmara people.
Oh man, this one blew my mind.
They have an oral tradition about an ancestral creator being bursting out of the ground at a specific, now dormant volcano called Budgebim.
Right, and the story says this being spat out, what do they call, lava teeth?
Lava teeth, yes.
Yeah.
Into the surrounding landscape. So geologists went to the site, expecting the eruption to be maybe 4,000 or 5,000 years old. They used argon dating on the volcanic rocks to find the exact age.
Which is a brilliant mechanism in itself. Argon dating, specifically potassium argon dating, works by measuring radioactive decay, right?
Exactly. Potassium-40 is a radioactive isotope naturally found in volcanic rock, and it slowly decays into argon-40 gas over a massive half-life of over 1 billion years.
Okay.
When a volcano erupts and the rock is liquid magma, all the existing argon gas escapes. But the moment that lava cools and hardens into solid rock, it traps any new argon gas that is created from the decaying potassium.
Oh, wow. So the rock acts like a geological stopwatch?
Right. It starts ticking the exact second the lava cools. By crushing the rock and measuring the ratio of potassium to trapped argon gas, scientists can determine precisely when that eruption happened.
So they read the geological stopwatch on these lava teeth at Budgebim, and the dating proved the eruption happened 37,000 years ago.
37,000 years.
Neanderthals were still walking the earth in Europe when this happened. The last ice age hadn't even reached its peak. Yet the oral description of lava tooth perfectly matches the unique, jagged volcanic fragments that were created during that specific, localized eruption.
Think about that. For a story to survive 37,000 years, it had to be transmitted across over 1,200 generations.
Yeah.
This completely obliterates the serial reproduction fallacy. It proves, empirically, that the human mind, when organized under the right cultural conditions, is a vastly more durable hard drive than stone, steel, or silicon.
Okay, I have to stop and push back on this because it challenges everything we were taught about human progress. If human memory is so durable and oral history is so robust, why did we ever invent writing? I mean, why did the Sumerians bother pressing reeds into wet clay to invent cuneiform? Writing feels objectively better because it's external.
Right, it feels safer.
Yeah, like if I write down a recipe, I know it's exactly the same recipe 10 years from now. Relying on memory just feels like an incredibly risky gamble compared to externalizing it.
That reaction is completely understandable, but it highlights the exact bias of a literate society. Writing is a technology of convenience, but it inherently leads to cognitive atrophy.
Cognitive atrophy.
Yes. When we externalize our memory to devices, whether that's a clay tablet, a piece of paper, or a smartphone, we no longer have to carry that information inside us. We outsource our memory. We judge ancient humans as primitive because we are projecting our own inability to remember a grocery list without a digital app onto them.
Ouch. But true.
But in a primary oral culture, knowledge isn't a database you go and look up. Knowledge is something you embody. It is who you are. The stakes are existential.
Right, if you forget the location of a hidden water source during a drought, your entire tribe dies.
Exactly. Writing allows a civilization to hold more total data, but it makes the individual human mind weaker, and it makes the culture's core memory entirely dependent on the survival of the physical medium.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around the mechanics of this. How do they actually do it without the data corrupting over 1,200 generations? Because surely someone forgets a line, or someone's kid mishears a word, and over thousands of years that compounds.
You would think so.
The source talks about the technology of oral history, specifically the Australian songlines, as a way to prevent that data drift.
The songlines are arguably the most sophisticated memory technology ever devised. They're essentially narrative maps. The plot of the story, the journey of the ancestral creator being, is tied sequentially to specific physical landmarks in the environment.
Okay.
The landscape itself acts as an external checksum.
A checksum, like in computer science.
Exactly like in computer science. In networking, a checksum is a mathematical algorithm run on a file. If even a single bit of data is altered during transmission, the resulting checksum won't match, and the computer knows the file is corrupted and rejects it.
Oh, I see where this is going.
In a songline, the physical geography is the checksum. If the song says the hero performed a specific action at a red rock, shaped like a sleeping lizard, and you walk the path and arrive at that location, and the rock doesn't match the description.
You know your song has been corrupted.
Yes. The physical world verifies the mental data. And the stakes for getting it wrong are brutal. If you change the song, you literally get lost in the desert.
Wow.
It's as a peer-reviewed, distributed database. The elders of different neighboring groups must agree on the exact wording of overlapping verses. If one family's verse drifts, the families holding the adjacent verses immediately correct it during communal gatherings.
Because forgetting or altering the song is treated as a severe crime. It threatens the survival of the entire network.
Exactly. It's a decentralized, living blockchain of human survival.
And when you compare that deep time and that incredible cultural rigor to where we are today, the contrast is just jarring. We have another source from Carl E. Martin who analyzes modern pop culture, specifically this phenomenon he calls the Gen Alpha melody.
This part is fascinating.
He breaks down how today's top pop songs are unconsciously recycling the exact same simplistic four-note melodies over and over again. And the reason for this ties right back to our technology.
It's an algorithmic flattening of culture. Martin points out that because music distribution is now entirely governed by algorithms, specifically platforms like TikTok songs, are no longer optimized for deep emotional resonance or narrative journey.
They are optimized for 15-second loop retention.
Exactly. The algorithm rewards immediate, frictionless familiarity, so producers strip out complex bridges, challenging chord progressions, or melodic development, and just hammer the same four-note sequence that hooks the dopamine receptors instantly.
We produce quintillions of bytes of data every single day, but culturally we have the memory of a goldfish. We are losing our connection to deep time. I mean, think about your own life for a second. If your phone's hard drive fails today and your cloud account gets locked, What happens to your family history?
It's terrifying to think about.
Where are your photos? Do you know the stories of your great-grandparents? What is the songline of your own life?
And that loss of a shared durable memory is intimately connected to the breakdown of our shared immediate reality. It's not just our deep history that is fragmenting. The ground we walk on every day is cracking beneath us.
Let's explore that breakdown of the digital monoculture. Our source from Matt Walsh makes a fascinating argument that our shared cultural reality didn't just slowly fade away. It broke at a very specific, identifiable moment in time.
He points to the year 2009.
Yeah. Why 2009?
2009 is a crucial inflection point. Before 2009, Walsh points out, society still largely operated within a monoculture. There was an official shared narrative. People interacted primarily within physical social circles.
You all watched the same major cultural events on television. You read the same basic, local, and national news.
And most importantly, you lived in a shared physical reality with the people around you. If you had a deeply fringe or extreme belief, your physical neighbors would provide a moderating friction.
Right. But post-2009, with the explosion of the smartphone in everyone's pocket and the shift from chronological social media feeds to algorithmically curated feeds, reality began to fracture.
The mechanics of these algorithms completely changed human social dynamics.
They utilize reinforcement learning to optimize for one thing, engagement. And the easiest way to generate engagement is through outrage and confirmation bias.
So now, if you hold a fringe belief, you don't have to face the friction of your physical neighbors telling you you're being unreasonable. You just go online.
The algorithm sees what you click on, and it begins bombarding you with content and communities of people who share that exact fringe belief. It creates a hermetically sealed feedback loop until that idea, no matter how extreme, feels like the undeniable total reality of the world.
Which brings up a brilliant point Walsh makes about nostalgia. We hear a lot of people today talking about being nostalgic for the 90s or the early 2000s.
Yeah, constantly.
But people aren't actually nostalgic for blockbuster video late fees or having to print out MapQuest directions or the inconvenience of the analog world.
No.
What they're deeply, desperately nostalgic for is a world that wasn't invisibly manipulated by faceless, mindless algorithms. They are pining for a shared human culture, a baseline reality that everyone could agree existed.
It's like we traded a giant communal campfire where everyone could see the same faces, share the same warmth, and tell the same stories, for a million individual flashlights pointing in a million different directions.
That's a great analogy.
We can see our own feet perfectly clearly. We know exactly what we believe, but we've completely lost the stars. We have no shared horizon anymore. We're just wandering in the dark, bumping into each other.
And that analogy of losing the stars and staring only at our own feet is eerily similar to a diagnosis made over a century ago. In our source from Catholic Frequency, we look at the writings of the English philosopher and theologian G.K. Chesterton, primarily focusing on his book Orthodoxy, published in 1908.
1908.
Long before the internet, long before AI, Chesterton diagnosed the exact philosophical disease of modernity that we are suffering from right now.
The source outlines 4 specific predictions Chesterton made that have terrifyingly come true. The first one is his concept of the madness of logic. Chesterton wrote this brilliant line, "Poets do not go mad, but chess players do."
He argued that the poet just wants to get his head into the heavens. He accepts mystery and the infinite. But the logician seeks to get the heavens into his head, and it is his head that splits.
It is a profound, almost counterintuitive observation. The modern assumption is that people go crazy when they abandon logic and embrace superstition.
But Chesterton argued the exact opposite. He said the modern world won't go mad by abandoning logic. It goes mad by keeping nothing but logic.
Okay, unpack the chess metaphor.
Chess is a perfect metaphor. It is a closed system. It has strict rules, a finite board, and perfect mathematical logic. But it has no room for human nuance.
Right.
If you strip away mystery, intuition, paradox, and human connection, you are left with pure, mechanical rationality. Look at extreme ideologies today, like radical transhumanism or the algorithms running your social media feed. They are internally, logically airtight.
They build out from a single premise with perfect consistency.
Exactly. But because they are closed systems that reject the messy mystery of human nature, they end in a place that is entirely disconnected from human flourishing. They end in insanity.
Because they destroyed the mystery. Chesterton warned that when you destroy mystery, you create morbidity. And we see this exact chess player logic playing out perfectly in our author update source.
Oh, the AI book generation.
Yeah, it discusses how AI large language models are auto-generating entire libraries of books, and their authors making massive amounts of money just flooding platforms with AI-generated novels.
To understand why this feels so dystopian, you have to understand the mechanics of how an LLM actually works. An AI like ChatGPT isn't experiencing a sudden flash of creative inspiration.
Oh.
It is a stochastic parrot. It is a massive statistical engine that calculates the mathematical probability of what the next word in a sequence should be based on billions of data points.
It is pure mechanical output, optimizing for a word count or a stylistic prompt, entirely devoid of the human mystery of creativity. It is the ultimate manifestation of the chess player's logic, flawless grammar, perfectly structured plots, zero soul.
And that ties directly into Chesterton's second prediction. The modern world will worship progress without ever defining what it is progressing toward.
The worship of motion and the contempt for memory. Chesterton noted that the modern progressive thinker is always apologizing because every generation discovers that what they passionately called progress 20 years ago is now the exact thing they have to dismantle and apologize for.
Which is so true.
But why does that happen? It seems like we are just running on a treadmill.
Because if you don't have a fixed anchor, if you don't possess a defined moral endpoint of what a perfect society actually looks like, you aren't actually progressing. You are just accelerating into a void.
Wow.
Progress requires a destination. The modern algorithmic world hates being asked to define its endpoint because that requires making absolute moral claims. So instead of answering the question, society just increases the speed of the treadmill to avoid hearing it.
And then his third prediction brings this massive philosophical concept right into the living room. He said the state won't destroy the family by attacking it directly with armies or legislation. It will destroy the family by offering to replace it.
Chesterton viewed the home as the last remaining fortress against totalitarian impulses.
Why the home?
Because inside the home, a human being is a sovereign. You are a parent, a spouse, a creator of culture. You're not merely a worker, a taxpayer, a citizen, or a consumer.
Right.
The modern bureaucratic state and corporate forces cannot tolerate a sovereign space they don't control. So to break that sovereignty, the state slowly replaces the family's functions.
It offers subsidized daycare, screens to act as babysitters, apps to manage scheduling, and creates economic structures that require dual incomes, making the ancient act of raising your own children at home an exclusive luxury for the rich.
Exactly. And his fourth prediction was that eugenics would return, not wearing the jackboots of the 1930s, but disguised entirely as euphemisms. We see this constant push to sanitize the removal of the vulnerable through clinical, compassionate-sounding language.
It's all connected. The algorithms isolate us into individual realities. The pure logic drives us mad. Progress becomes a blind, hyper-accelerated religion. And the family is quietly replaced by the state and the screen.
Which brings us to the inevitable, impending crisis of meaning. If algorithms fracture our shared reality and AI begins to auto-generate our culture and replace our labor, what happens to human purpose?
What are we actually supposed to do with ourselves all day? This brings us to a highly relevant source from Doug Wilson, who is discussing Elon Musk's proposal for universal basic income, or UBI. Musk believes that AI and robotics will soon usher in an era of massive, unprecedented economic prosperity.
The idea being that the machines will do all the physical and cognitive labor.
Right. People won't have to work to survive, and honestly, they won't have any meaningful economic contribution to make, even if they wanted to. So the solution is simple. The government just gives everyone a set income to live comfortably.
On paper, using the logic of the chess player, that sounds like a utopia. But Wilson argues this represents a profound, catastrophic misunderstanding of human nature.
Because humans need to work.
He asserts that humans were created for meaningful work. It's a foundational psychological and moral imperative, not just a way to pay the rent. Human beings require friction to develop character.
So if you take away a man's reason for striving, if you remove the necessity of overcoming obstacles to provide for his family and just hand him a thanks for breathing check,
He doesn't suddenly write symphonies or paint masterpieces.
Wilson uses this incredibly stark, visceral image. He says if you implement UBI without a framework of meaning, men will just become unhappy hogs lined up in the sky.
It's a brutal image, but effective.
They'll cash their government checks, walk down to the pharmacy to renew their orgasm pills, download a summary of Brave New World directly into their neural implants, and go home to stare at the ceiling in complete despair.
It is the ultimate logical progression of a society that has removed all mystery, all struggle, and all anchors.
So to counteract that despair, you need a firm, unyielding structure of meaning. Our source, featuring Father Paul Trubenbach, introduces a concept essential to human flourishing, a hierarchy of values.
He argues that modern misery doesn't stem from a lack of resources,
Yeah.
but from a profound confusion about what we are actually meant to serve.
Everybody serves something. Whether you admit it or not, something sits at the top of your priority list. And if you don't consciously choose it, you default to the modern secular inversion.
Father Trubenbach lays out the traditional Orthodox Christian hierarchy, which has anchored the West for 2 millennia.
Number 1 is Christ, or the ultimate transcendent good. Number 2 is family. Number 3 is neighbor. And dead last, at the very bottom of the list, number 4 is the self.
But the modern, fragmented, algorithmic world flips that hierarchy entirely upside down. We put the ego, the self, at the very top.
We demand that all our relationships, our work, and our communities serve our personal comfort, our self-actualization, and our desires first.
And paradoxically, as Trubenbach points out, placing the ego first is the exact mechanism that makes us so miserable. It creates constant friction.
Well, yeah, if your ego is your god, then your spouse, your children, and your neighbors are just tools to serve you or obstacles in your way. It breeds resentment in every relationship.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me ask you a question that I know a lot of people are probably thinking. How do secular humanists deal with this? Because there are millions of people who don't believe in the theological, religious part of that hierarchy. They don't put Christ at the top, but they still deeply want the ethical result.
They want a society where people care for their neighbors.
Exactly. This tension is deeply explored in our Living Stone source. They discuss prominent secular thinkers like the evolutionary biologist Brett Weinstein and the historian Bart Ehrman. These are brilliant guys, secular materialists, who look at the Christian ethic of self-sacrifice, compassion, and caring for the weak, and they say, yes, that is objectively beautiful. We should all organize society to live that way.
But the source points out a massive, unresolvable philosophical contradiction in that stance. Weinstein and Ehrman hold to an evolutionary materialist worldview.
Okay, so what does that mean practically?
If you drill down into the mechanics of evolutionary biology, at its core, that worldview dictates that history is driven by natural selection and the survival of the fittest. Might makes right.
It is the ethic of the Roman Empire, or the ethic of the wolf culling the weak elk from the herd. The wolves don't pause to care for the sick, lame elk, they eat them, which biologically strengthens the herd. Nature normally punishes self-sacrifice unless it strictly benefits your immediate genetic kin.
The source calls this the dilemma of the generous Jesus myth. Humanists desperately want the fruits of Christianity. They want universal human rights, they want charity, they want hospitals, they want the inherent dignity of the weak and marginalized.
But they completely reject the roots of the tree that grew that fruit, which is the theological reality of a transcendent moral order, specifically, in this context, the resurrection and ascension of Christ.
The argument made in the source is that demanding voluntary self-sacrifice in a purely materialist Darwinian universe is just a luxury belief.
A luxury belief.
Yes. If might truly makes right, and there is no ultimate cosmic justice, then giving your limited resources to the biological losers of society is foolish.
The source argues that secular humanists only advocate for this compassion to virtue signal to other elites to gain reputational status within their specific cultural bubble. They are operating on the fumes of a Christian moral framework while actively dismantling the engine.
I can practically hear someone arguing against this. Wait, can't someone just be a good, compassionate person without believing in the theological roots? People do good things all the time without being religious. Do you really need the roots to enjoy the fruit?
It's a very common pushback, but the source's argument isn't about individual psychology. It's looking at the grand macro sweep of history. Without a transcendent anchor, an absolute, unshakable belief that a higher power actually governs history and will ultimately reward self-sacrificial love, human society naturally, inevitably defaults to the Roman style of domination.
The Christian ethic of prioritizing the weak over the strong is a massive historical anomaly. It breaks all the rules of human power dynamics.
If it's just a useful fiction, a pleasant myth we tell ourselves, then when times get truly hard, when the resources dry up and the economy collapses, the veneer of secular compassion will strip away instantly, and the wolves will return.
The source argues that the only reason the early Christians could suffer, be fed to lions, and die for the weak was their absolute, literal conviction that Jesus had ascended and was actively governing history. Without that structural anchor, compassion eventually loses to raw power every time.
And what's incredible is that this philosophical collision between power, compassion, and the future of society isn't just an abstract debate for historians. It's actively shaping the worldview of the people building our actual future.
Which brings us to a fascinating case study in Elon Musk.
We have a source from NXR Studios that focuses entirely on this dynamic. What's fascinating about this from an analytical standpoint is observing Musk as a real-time manifestation of these exact clashing values.
And to be clear, we are just unpacking their analysis here. We aren't endorsing or condemning, but looking at the philosophical shift.
Right. Musk has undergone a massive, very public ideological realignment over the last few years. He went from being a fairly standard Silicon Valley Democrat, motivated by what he described as a desire for universal compassion and kindness, to aligning with right-wing nationalism. He is now publicly advocating for things like mass deportations and warning about the urgent need to preserve Western civilization before it collapses.
And what sparked the conversation in the NXR source is that Musk recently posted that he agrees with the teachings of Jesus.
Right, which sent the internet into a frenzy.
The hosts at NXR, Joel Webbin and Kangman Lee, break this statement down using a rigorous framework from Reformed theology. They analyze what it actually means to have faith or to agree with a moral system.
In Reformed theology, true saving faith requires three distinct sequential components. Step one is knowledge. You have to actually know the historical and doctrinal facts of what is being taught. Step two is assent. You intellectually agree that those facts are true and objectively good.
But it's the third step where things get complicated. Step three is trust and obedience.
Precisely. To illustrate this, the source uses a provocative, brilliant theological example: demons.
According to historic Christian theology, demons possess both knowledge and assent. They know exactly who God is, and they know his teachings are true. In fact, the source jokes that demons have much better, more accurate theology than most modern Christians.
But they absolutely refuse the third step. They refuse to submit, to trust, and to obey the authority of that knowledge.
So they view Musk as having knowledge and assent. He likes the ethical teachings of Jesus. He likes the idea of forgiveness and compassion. But he struggles with the concept of lordship.
He struggles with the idea of submitting his entire life, his immense wealth, and his autonomous, boundless technological ambitions to a higher, restrictive moral authority.
And this theological analysis ties directly back to our previous discussion about the limits of secular compassion. The NXR source dives into a sharp critique of what they call toxic empathy.
Toxic empathy.
They argue that Jesus' teachings of compassion, if severed from divine justice and applied at a national policy level without rigorous discernment, inevitably lead to suicidal empathy.
So it's compassion that has lost its anchor. Walk me through how empathy becomes toxic, because those two words seem like opposites.
From their perspective, they argue that if a society prioritizes unconditional empathy for criminals, or allows open borders out of a desire to be kind to illegal immigrants, but does so at the direct expense of the safety and stability of its own innocent citizens, that compassion has become twisted.
It is actively harming the innocent in the name of feeling virtuous about the guilty.
They critique the modern concept of blank slate liberalism. This is the ideological assumption that all human beings are exactly the same, totally interchangeable, and should be stripped of cultural, national, or ethnic distinctions.
Right. The idea that a citizen of a nation and someone who just crossed the border are owed the exact same duties by the state.
Exactly. The source rejects that, advocating instead for a classical concept rooted in the writings of Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, the doctrine of properly ordered loves.
Meaning you can't just love everyone equally.
The fundamental idea is that you are not called, nor are you capable of loving all 8 billion people on Earth equally. Because as finite, limited beings, attempting to love everyone equally means you effectively love no one. You spread your resources so thin they are useless.
Your love must be rigorously triaged. You love God first, then you have a primary duty to your immediate family, then to your local neighbors, and then to your nation.
Augustine argued that righteous anger is simply anger at the right time for the right things, driven by the defense of these ordered loves.
So it's like a triage unit in an emergency room. You can't just throw a universal blanket of compassion over the whole hospital and hope everyone gets better. You have to ruthlessly order who you treat first based on the severity of the wound and your specific duty as a doctor.
That is a perfect analogy. And synthesizing this with our earlier segments, Musk represents the ultimate brilliant, modern, logic-driven intellectual. He is desperately trying to save the technological future of humanity. He wants AI, he wants Mars colonies, he wants Neuralink.
But as he watches the cultural fabric tear apart, he is simultaneously realizing that the pure logic of progress, the chess player's mindset, isn't enough to hold society together.
You might actually need the rigid, ethical, cultural, and theological framework of the deep past, specifically Western Christian values and ordered loves to prevent civilization from collapsing into the chaos of toxic empathy or algorithmic madness.
He is trying to build the rockets of the future using the moral fuel of the past.
It is a massive tension.
So we've gone from 37,000-year-old volcanic eruptions to the mechanics of algorithmic echo chambers to Elon Musk wrestling with Augustine's theology of love. What does this all actually mean for you, the listener?
How do everyday people living in this overwhelming fragmentation respond to it? We can't all buy a social media platform or build a rocket.
This brings us to our final exploration today: practical retreats and reclaiming the narrative.
When the macroculture, the big shared national narrative, is fragmenting and breaking down, human beings naturally retreat to the microculture to build fortresses of order.
They seek out physical anchors. Our source from Memoria Press discusses the massive, unprecedented rise in homeschooling over the last decade. And crucially, they argue this is not merely a reactionary movement.
It is not just parents running away from chaotic, progressive public schools in fear. It is a positive, intentional pursuit toward structure, classical order, and foundational learning.
The source takes direct aim at the classic socialization myth. It is the #1 thing you hear. If you homeschool, your kids will be weird. They won't know how to act in the real world.
But the hosts point out a glaring flaw in that logic. Throwing a young, highly impressionable child into the chaotic, peer-dominated melting pot of a progressive classroom before they have a firm grasp of their own identity is incredibly dangerous.
You aren't socializing them, you are just letting the mob raise them.
Children require foundational architecture before they can handle complexity. The source talks about the classical model of education, the trivium, which starts with the grammar stage absorbing absolute facts and rules.
They joke about the modern educational absurdity of expecting fourth graders to have meaningful Socratic discussions about complex moral ambiguities.
You have to pour the concrete foundations in the early years. You teach them objective truth, grammar, math, and the family's hierarchy of values, so that when they are older, they actually have the intellectual architecture to engage with differing viewpoints without simply being absorbed by whatever the loudest voice in the room is shouting.
And they stress that homeschooling doesn't mean locking your kid in a closet. It requires external accountability to work. You hire a tutor for advanced math, you barter with a neighbor to teach piano, you build a physical, interdependent community.
And you intentionally expose them to challenging, complex literature when they are ready. The source contrasts the jarring, prophetic nature of Flannery O'Connor's Southern Gothic stories with the cozy puzzles of Agatha Christie.
That literary contrast is so revealing. Agatha Christie writes neat, logical puzzles where the murder is solved, the room is tidied up, and order is perfectly restored by the detective. It's safe.
Flannery O'Connor, on the other hand, writes grotesque, violent, spiritually jarring stories that force the reader to confront the harsh, uncomfortable realities of sin, grace, and human brokenness.
True classical education isn't about sheltering children from the darkness of reality. It's about equipping them with the specific moral flashlight they need to navigate it.
This deep, aching search for intentional, structured truth is mirrored in our source, featuring the commentator Paul Vanderklay.
He talks openly about his own journey searching for deep roots in a rootless world. He details starting in a standard Baptist background, moving through the trendy emergent church phase of the 2000s, listening to deconstructionist pastors like Rob Bell, attending Catholic silent monasteries to try and find some peace, and ultimately he kept searching for historical weight, leading him toward the ancient traditions of orthodoxy.
People are exhausted by the treadmill of constant progress. They're starved for historical continuity. They are looking for an anchor that predates the internet, something that won't flip like a magnetic bit on a server.
And that search for an ultimate anchor brings us beautifully to our final source from Matt Fradd, discussing one of the most famous literary friendships in history, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis.
The source recounts their legendary late-night walk on Addison's Walk at Oxford University, where they were debating the fundamental nature of myth. At the time, Lewis loved ancient myth, the dying and rising gods of the Norse, the epic tragedies of the Greeks. But as a strict rationalist, he dismissed them as lies breathed through silver.
They were beautiful, poetic, but ultimately completely untrue.
But Tolkien stops him in his tracks. Tolkien says, they are not lies. Tolkien argued that because human beings are created in the image of an ultimate creator, the stories we invent, our deepest, most resonant myths, aren't just random fantasies.
They contain fractured echoes of ultimate divine truth. They reflect the fundamental realities and moral structures of the universe.
And then Tolkien delivers the philosophical knockout blow that ultimately converts Lewis. He tells Lewis that the story of Christ, the dying and rising God who sacrifices himself to save the weak, is simply the myth made history.
It perfectly satisfies the deep, imaginative, mythic resonance of the human heart. But it didn't happen in a fairy tale realm. It actually happened in physical, observable time under the specific Roman jurisdiction of Pontius Pilate.
It takes the soaring mystery of myth and anchors it permanently to the rigid, undeniable structure of human history.
And if we step back and connect all the dots of our deep dive today, whether we are talking about the Australian Aboriginal people preserving life-saving survival data through the external checksums of ancient songlines, or parents choosing to pull their kids out of the monoculture to homeschool them and preserve their family's hierarchy of values, or Tolkien insisting to C.S. Lewis that our deepest myths reflect ultimate truths, the solution to the fragmented, algorithmic, fragile modern world is exactly the same.
The solution is intentional, deeply rooted memory and a structured physical community.
You have to build your own songline. You cannot trust a machine or an algorithm or a server farm in the Arctic to remember who you are.
Which brings us to our call to action. The morning roundup isn't just about absorbing information, it's about what you do with it. Based on the incredible stack of sources we've explored today, we have 3 practical steps for you to apply to your own life this week.
Step 1. Audit your hierarchy of values. Look at your daily decisions. Look at your bank statement and your calendar. Where do you actually spend your time and your money?
Are you truly putting your family and your community first? Or are you operating under the modern inversion where the ego and personal comfort demand service from everyone else? Find where the friction is in your life and see if it's because your ego is sitting in the wrong spot.
Step 2. Escape the algorithm and cultivate a songline in your own life. Do not offshore your family's memory to a fragile silicon hard drive. This weekend, go talk to the elders in your family.
Write down their stories. Memorize them. Create an oral history that exists in the physical world, peer-reviewed by your loved ones around a dinner table. Make your memory robust enough to survive the power going out.
Step 3. Reevaluate your work. If a stochastic parrot and AI could realistically do your job tomorrow, where do you derive your ultimate meaning?
If Elon Musk's vision of universal basic income becomes a reality in the next decade, how do you avoid becoming an unhappy hog lined up in the sky? Find a physical practice, a local community, or a tangible craft that requires friction and anchors you in meaningful labor.
As always, we present these connections to you, but ultimately you have to decide how to navigate this fragmenting landscape for yourself. We highly encourage you to check out the original sources to go deeper into any of these incredibly complex topics.
And please remember to like, subscribe, and share the Morning Roundup with anyone in your life who might need a little help finding their anchor today.
I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. We operate under this immense assumption that in 10,000 years, future humans will know absolutely everything about us because of the endless oceans of data we've stored on the internet.
But what if the power fails?
What if the silicon rots? What if the only thing that actually survives our massive, complex digital civilization isn't our data centers, but the stories we choose to tell our children tonight?
Until next time.